That's about all that you need, really.
hmm And we're live. Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Uh,
Hey, everybody. What's up? I sound so unenthused. I'm sorry.
yeah, it's
But
completely understandable. I mean, usually when these streams starts, I've woken up. I've probably only been up for like 2 hours. So yeah.
I understand. It's just we didn't have particularly a subject that we like what going into this knew that the stream was going to be about or knew that the stream had to be about today. So we're gonna try and interact with you guys a bit. Don't worry, we're still gonna be doing a response to a video. But I just wanted to preface this. I just wanted to preface this with that. So if it doesn't seem like we have a very clear sort of narrative of what we're talking about, well, that's exactly why.
hmm And it's also kind of why when the stream was first set up, there was no topic put up. But
Yeah.
anyways, on the plus side, we do have a video. This one's we're going to be looking at PragerU again. Pretty sure
Yeah,
everyone here has at least watched one or two of their videos before.
we responded to a couple of their videos on the stream previously, and it would be nice to respond to them or Steven Crowder or Ben Shapiro, um, as a nice change from the sort of vulgar Marxist types.
hmm Not to mention that they always have some very interesting takes, especially since sometimes we hear a lot of their talking points from members of our own audience, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Mostly it comes from the people who believe that nationalism is compatible with anarchism, which is something a video I do plan on making at some point in the future. But for the time being, yeah, this is going to
or
be.
or think of libertarianism as just a more edgy version of liberalism.
Well, I mean, don't you know, libertarianism is just fiscally conservative, socially liberal.
Waves Gadsden flag.
Gadsden flag intensifies. But anyways, yeah, like what's interesting about this video, at least at first glance, if you see it on your subscriber feed or just in your recommended page, is what the hell does "Be Brave" mean? Is this an advertisement for the Brave browser, or is this just trying
Sports
to
team.
encourage?
What it
uh,
sounds like to me.
yeah, there is a team called the Braves, isn't there? I forget where they are. Where they are though.
Like an advertisement for the NFL or even perhaps Nike brand shoes. Sounds very much like an ad campaign they'd put out.
hmm But as you'll see very shortly, no, the people at PragerU and they got Nikki Haley to do the they got Nikki Haley to do this video. If you don't know who Nikki Haley is, I don't blame you in the slightest. I kind of forget who she was too. I'm pretty sure she was.
The
Uh,
U.S. ambassador to the UN from like 2017 to I think 2018.
yeah, I knew
Uh,
that. Just like even
for
before
the
then.
earlier half, it was for the earlier half of the Trump administration, but I'm not sure if she got like replaced with somebody else or if that happened when that happened.
Yeah, and that's what I think is. That's what I think is a more interesting choice because of all the guests that PragerU can get on, and they can get a lot of people, a lot of big name personalities like Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro, even what's his name, uh, freaking Jordan Peterson. You know the author of the famous bestseller, The Art of Sucking Expletive.
The the person who put out the famous brand of cereal, Oops, all Xanax.
Yeah, Deadly Cheese People says Nikki Haley was the governor of South Carolina. I knew she was a governor, but I wanted to say New Mexico or Arizona.
She was also the ambassador to the UN for a bit, but yeah,
Yeah,
I didn't. I got to admit, I didn't really know that off the top of my head. So
yeah. So
thanks for clarifying.
yeah, suffice. Oh, we got a donation.
ESO throws
All right,
50-pound
nice.
boulders onto Nick Hers' heads. ESO sends Nick Hers to the moon. ESO slices Nick Hers' heads off with a katana. ESO drop kicks Nick Hers off of bridges. ESO
Is it over?
No.
collapses on Nick Hers' faces. ESO makes Nick Hers beg for his salvation.
God, I wish I could copy paste it in text format to you. It's from Asia. He donates $2. Yeah, thank you for the $2.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. What did it say? Just
ESO
tell me
throws
afterwards.
ESO throws 50-pound boulders onto Nick Hers' heads.
Oh god. Oh man. Yep. Well, mix them into concrete again. Appreciate it. But but yeah. So, do you want to start the video or
Yeah, let's go.
you want to interact with the chat for a bit more since again the video don't get us wrong, the video is we have some stuff to respond to, but clearly the most important thing we could be doing here, at least the most interesting thing, IMO, is interacting with the chat.
Asher says ESO slices heads off Nick Hers with a katana. SO, I just have to ask, what do you have against Nick Hers?
Well, how much time do you got?
Let's see here, about 50 minutes.
Smells like shit. He eats all the damn chicken. He thinks he's the best dancer. And I just fucking hate him.
All right, well, chat's not really saying anything at the moment, so I think we should just go ahead and start the video.
Yeah, sure.
I know what it's like to walk into a room where plain truth seems like a foreign concept, where just speaking your mind can feel daunting, where the founding principles of the United States of America are openly ridiculed.
I mean, I don't know about you, but that just sounds like any time I'm in a room with my parents.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. Part of that, though, already there are a bunch of major objections that I have. First of all, there's the idea of plain, quote unquote, plain truth or common sense. Well, no, given that one's interpretation of reality or what informs how they approach understanding nature is determined by their idea of what this information entails, or what specific meaning they ascribe to it. I'm not denying the concept of objective truth, obviously. It's just this is something that really bugs me. The notion that there is like an objective way to to argue for information, or for how to contextualize information, or an objective way to look at your environment. I mean, there are a lot of subjects where it doesn't even conceptually make sense to say that there's just a common sense way of looking at it. But yeah, the reason that this bugs me so much is not really because of the context of the video. It's because you see, this is a very common adage in argumentation, the idea that media, or the idea that media isn't being objective, and that's the problem with it, or that media even can be objective, because what this essentially is an excuse for someone to assert their own perspective as being valid without having to demonstrate it by simply defaulting to saying it's the common sense observation. Even for people who hold and this isn't really exclusive to any particular philosophy or ideology. I've seen this even among a lot of libertarians, unfortunately. But it's a really it is a trend in discourse that I wouldn't really say it's a fallacy, because it can apply to subjects that don't really have anything to do with argumentation. But it's something the idea that there's such a thing as common sense. I would definitely like to, as a way, at the very least, if you're going to bring that up, at the very least explain why it is that you think it's something that is just so self-evident, and what counts as something being self-evident. Don't just say, well, it's common sense, therefore it's true. Or if you don't have this position, you're not arguing in good faith because it's so common sense.
It goes without saying that what defines common sense, what entails common sense, and how someone would even be able to know whether or not something is common sense at all is entirely arbitrarily defined. And at least to me, it comes off as a very transparent way of demonstrating that they don't really understand the principles that they hold or are even attempting to argue for, and as such are trying to appeal to some very vague platitude in the vain hope that the person that they're speaking to happens to presuppose that particular argument to be true as well. It's like if two constitutionalists are having a discussion about the Constitution and having a debate about how certain amendments ought to be interpreted. They're both going to presuppose that the Constitution is valid. Now, in all fairness, that's not a knock against constitutionalists per se, since in most discussions, people are going to engage in some level of presupposition, since you don't really need to establish that the TV show Star Trek exists, as a random example, in order to have a discussion about the TV show.
And that's my biggest issue with this notion of objectivity in presentation, or quote unquote common sense. Well, the idea of common sense in discourse logically implies or leads to the notion that from there, well, if these things are just so self-evident, then obviously there's an objective way to convey information to every single person that everyone can mutually understand. And if they don't, then that's just them being they actually do understand, they're just being intellectually dishonest. The other issue, the one that which is something you just touched upon, is also that it is a convenient way to it lowers the bar of what can pass as an argument, because it essentially completely negates the possibility of debating over epistemology. What counts as a methodology, why the methodology that informs your principles is justified, what counts as a standard of proof, why and how this is justified, etc. And it's actually this specific trope in argumentation which I think has caused a lot of has caused a lot of the more troubled ideas to prosper, like nationalism, for instance, or Marxism. You can just look at it and you can tell it heavily favors the philosophies which attempt to base themselves on inductive reasoning, because inductive reasoning um, only really works in a framework where we're not questioning epistemology.
All right. Now I'm just looking at the chat right now. Ether says, common sense to me is a natural divergent property of human interest, for instance, self-preservation.
Okay, but that doesn't really address my point.
And I think it's kind of demonstrating mine in that what it means is going to be completely different depending on who it is you're speaking to. I would dare say that it falls into I would dare say that it becomes an anti-concept.
All right. So there were the two other things that Nikki Haley addressed. The other one being the values of the U.S. Constitution.
I don't think
That.
I don't think we've gotten to that yet. What's on screen is something that she's just about to introduce, which is where the founding principles of the United States of America are openly ridiculed. Which, although I remarked earlier that what she said kind of sounds like how I feel around boomers and my boomer parents. This this they're openly ridiculing the United States is, well, the exact opposite happens. I'm the one that's openly ridiculing the United States, and they're the ones trying desperately to defend it. They think that a disapproving glare is enough to somehow disprove everything I say about the United States and the United States government.
I mean, most of my criticisms of the U.S. government could apply to governments broadly, but that's not to say that the U.S. government doesn't uniquely deserve some criticisms as being one of the two states holding together most of the major international cartels on supply and finance, which allow political authority to thrive in most parts of the world currently. Well, okay, let me take that back. I wouldn't exactly say it's thriving, but for the last few hundred, if not thousands of years, it has, at least as long as the U.S. government, under its current regime, likewise with the Chinese government, have existed. Well, go back a few decades, you could argue the Soviet Union was the other one, but the point still remains. Throughout the last 150 years, the U.S. government's been the main empire throughout the unipolar liberal political economy. It's holding it together for the most part. I mean, it disproportionately has leverage over these international political cartels. So much so that it can, like we saw with Ecuador in 2018, uh, manipulate the credit for the entire financial industry of Ecuador as a way to leverage them into handing Julian Assange over to the U.S. government. Stuff like that happens quite regularly. That was just a particularly high-profile example of it. Like the U.S. government through the World Bank or the World Trade Organization will manipulate the credit for the financial industry of countries in Africa all the time in order to get them to change in order to get them to change how they legally define land, or who they give which organizations they give ownership of certain plots of land to. or how they plot out that land, mainly to help them consequently control the way that a supply of certain resources enter into the U.S. The U.S.'s political economy.
Mhm. Anyways, let's save these thoughts for until we start getting into, well, the U.S. So I'm just going to hit continue here real quick.
Sure.
For 2 years, I served as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Just to give you an idea of how strange things can get at the UN, consider that the Human Rights Council is dominated by some of the world's worst human rights offenders, countries like China, Cuba, and Venezuela.
I mean, why is there some international governing cartel that thinks it can arbitrate on issues of human rights?
Yeah, and that sort of demonstrates a broader problem with this video, but really just statism. Well, not statism, but the sort of the positivist view of rights in general. These are the organizations that, from from the perspective, from the legal framework you're trying to defend, from the rights framework you're trying to defend, these organizations decide what is or is not a right arbitrarily. The people who run these organizations. So what basis do you even have to coherently claim that those governments are rights violators, and what gives the UN legitimacy?
Dead air. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm just a little distracted at the moment.
Yeah, I thought you were getting ready to say something. That's why I didn't continue. But yeah, and then when you get into the natural rights perspective, well, that's fine, but you quickly run into issues with with the sort of holdovers from positivism that would be present in deontology, like the notion that ethical principles prescribe behavior, and that if behavior isn't prescribed, then somehow you can't have justice in society. And then you realize that you're making a categorical error, and actually ethical principles just describe how people interact, or what counts as a justified interaction. And if something is an ethical society, then uh, you wouldn't have systemic coercion, because having an ethical society entails specifically undermining the things that would allow such conditions to exist. So basically, it's kind of weird to even characterize rights in the way that they are being characterized in this video.
I mean, the very fact that you have this prescriptive idea of rights makes that it needs to be somehow protected by some governing body is what allows entities like China, Venezuela, and Cuba, which are admittedly they're very bad. There's no question or controversy about that whatsoever. However, the only reason that they are an issue at all in the context of the UN Human Rights Council is because there is a UN Human Rights Council. It's not human rights aren't something that need to be protected by some governing body. They're an intrinsic characteristic of moral agency. Don't know if there's
It's
really
not to
much more to.
say, and yeah, to clarify, because they're an intrinsic characteristic of being a moral agent, that's not to say that they'll be respected. No, you have to go out of your way to make sure that they are, but in doing the things that undermine the ability for say, states to set up barriers to entry which systemically privilege the political class and allow them to set up a monopoly on arbitration. In undermining the state's ability to do that, you've ensured that to some extent you do have a greater by default that you have a greater claim, or you have an equal claim to your resources and an equal ability to defend yourself than anybody else would. That's so essentially, if we're going to approach a rights framework, what I would argue the properly understood way of arguing for rights is to identify problems that are making it so people like the political class can exist, and make it so we aren't able to defend ourselves on a consistent playing field, and get rid of the things that would allow them to do that. And so it's more of a question of identifying what those things are and evaluating what the best way of thinking of those things would be.
All right. Anyways, let's continue.
All right.
True democracies like Israel are routinely abused.
You got to protect Israel. You got to protect Israel. You have to. Israel is great and wonderful and perfect, and has done no wrong in the entirety of history ever. They are God's chosen people, after all.
It's an actual fucking apartheid state right now, and the government of Israel just launched an unprovoked missile into Damascus, Syria, the other day, while the Capitol Hill shenanigans were going on, keeping people conveniently distracted.
Mm-hmm. Hell, I think that there's a bunch of airstrikes in other places of Syria. I haven't looked into it all that much, but yeah, that's what was happening when a bunch of conservators and alt-right infiltrators, allegedly, decided to do absolutely nothing when they stormed the Capitol building.
Police actually opened the gates to let them into the Capitol building.
Oh, it went further than that. They actually did selfies with them. They did selfies with the people who were going in, who, by the way, were courteous enough to stay inside the velvet rope, as they were illegally trespassing inside the Capitol building. What an absolute joke that was.
Heretic.
Oh yeah, because everyone knows that insurrections can be stopped with velvet rope. Now, is Israel a true democracy, and who cares anyway?
Well, I think the point they were making is that the point they were attempting to put forward is that, well, Israel is a good government and all these bad governments shit on it all the time. Israel is one of the worst fucking ones, honestly. It's just that they're used as a proxy by the US government and by several actors in Europe in order to try and control in order to try and control the supply of oil, leaving several governments and leaving several nations in the area. Israel basically is just a puppet state that allows several of these governments to establish a military presence there. It's there just for strategic purposes.
Yeah, they're basically one giant U.S. military base. The moment that it's kind of funny to think that the moment they stop being useful is the moment that they're basically screwed as a country. Their mere existence is heavily subsidized.
Yeah, they're a lot like North Korea in that regard. Not in the sort of legal order that the government's attempted to construct and defend, but in that they're a puppet state that exists for little more than the strategic intent of a much more influential state. And if we're gonna cite specifically how North Korea is like that, the Chinese government is essentially entirely propping up the North Korean government at this point, and the Chinese government is doing that specifically to make it so there isn't a NATO base directly at their southern border.
Yeah, the North Korea is basically a buffer zone between China and South Korea, and nothing more,
It's a lot,
nothing less.
but yeah, it's a lot like Israel as well. Israel's a lot like North Korea as well in how heavily militarized they are because of that.
hmm I can't help but wonder if you have similar rhetoric occurring in China, where their political ruling class talks about uh, North Korea as their greatest ally, the greatest bastion of democracy and communism in the world today, outside of China.
I have to look into that, but it would be interesting to see.
Parallels are pretty striking. And of course, it goes without saying that both North Korea and Israel are prison states where the people are kept in open slave camps. Anyways, I think we should continue here.
Sure.
And America, the nation that has protected the God-given rights of hundreds of millions of people all over the globe, is openly criticized.
Oh no, God forbid the frickin' anything is criticized ever. Or,
Yeah.
held to any kind of standard whatsoever. You see, we just say that this nation has protected people's rights. So not only is that true, but our simply saying it means that we're immune to criticism. You can't criticize us on anything we do, say, or believe ever. How
Yeah,
dare you?
what does that even mean? That statement was so vague and open for interpretation that just about anything could have been intended there. Are they promoting the sort of the CIA propaganda talking point that so-called neocons have been pushing out for the last 100 years or so? Probably even before that.
Which one? They put out a lot of narratives.
The notion that when the U.S. military invades another state, they're protecting democracy. It's the cosmopolitan argument for empire, as something Roderick Long is a term I heard Roderick Long used to describe it, and I think it's a pretty apt description.
That seems to be the case, since that statement that Haley just said says that the United States protects people's rights all over the world. Of course, I can easily imagine that by protecting people's rights, what she's actually referring to is protecting people's rights to have their oil taken from them at gunpoint, because the
Well,
United States government smelled petroleum under the soil.
that's the problem with that argument, by the way. Is it's an argument which treats intentions as though intentions determine what actions are taken, the interests of the U.S. government, what's entailed by the U.S. government sending its military to whatever nation is in question. So it's the same tactic. If you want me to draw a parallel that Marxists use when they argue that because the intention of our planning is to make it so people have more equality or make it so people have more access to resources, that's what it does. We're gonna treat it like that's what in function we're arguing.
All right. Now let's see here. Anything else that's worth addressing on this specific point? I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I mean, we've already addressed the issue of how ridiculous it is that governing bodies and states will attempt to claim that they're protecting people's rights when governments are easily and blatantly the greatest violators of rights ever.
Again, I mean, I didn't bring it up, but it's not even coherent to argue rights in that sense. But yeah, it's kind of difficult to make that case when by a government existing, it's going to be infringing upon the rights of others. How could you protect the rights, quote unquote, of people outside the nation when outside of the original nation in question, when that government declaring itself to be a nation inherently violates the rights of everybody that is living within that claimed nation?
It's a special kind of dumb. Anyways, I'm just going to continue again real quick.
Sure.
Why am I telling you this? Because most college campuses have become as anti-American, which is to say morally backward, as the UN.
America is moral, and criticizing America is morally backward. What do those words mean? How do I know this? I don't know, but it's backward. It's immoral to criticize the United States, you guys. I mean, perhaps in the height of the Cold War, you could argue that there was so much propaganda in the United States in regards to the us versus them narrative between the Soviet Union and the United States that criticizing the United States was socially tantamount to treason. And you could make an argument that behavioral preferences and social norms were such that, as created by or as set up by the United States through propaganda, that it was morally backwards to be critical of the United States. But it's very clear that Nikki Haley thinks that there is some kind of Nikki Haley is almost certainly going to be, and I'm going out on a limb here, is almost certainly one of those people that believes that morality is universal. And as such, she's going to see the United States as an absolute good that for some reason is beyond question. And just to put this in perspective, how insane this idea is, Thomas Jefferson, I'm pretty sure everyone's heard of him from their history textbooks, is pretty well known for saying that even God was not beyond criticism.
Yeah, criticism properly understood is just supposed to be whether it's within a group of people who are sort of intrigued by whatever positions you're exploring, or just in general. It's intended to be people raising um, potential blind spots that they observe with something that you're arguing, or inconsistencies. It's something that's it's something that's supposed to build upon what you're putting forward, or if not, explain why exactly in your premises you've made some sort of mistake, and offering some sort of correction. But so like, this isn't just for like boomer Republican types. Like, there seems to be, well, I understand why this is the case in political circles, but there seems to be a very strange aversion to criticism in a lot of areas of the libertarian movement as well. I mean, why? especially from the libertarian perspective, that has a very fleshed out view of politics and social organization, or at least people who are well read on libertarian literature. That's the case. But yeah, it's kind of weird that they would be averse to criticism, or people trying to identify with that circle would be averse to criticism, because the only, from my understanding, the only people who are scared of criticism are people who don't honestly believe what they're arguing, or are trying to be active. They don't honestly believe what they're arguing, or they don't have enough confidence in whatever position they argue in order to defend it.
Mm-hmm. Now, just to clarify something, it goes without saying that we do not endorse what universities are saying either. While it is perfectly legitimate and just to criticize just about anything ever for any reason you wish, the things that the universities are doing, we do not endorse either, because they're approaching the topic from bad faith and are clearly just trying to replace one authoritarian regime with another one that suits whatever marginal preferences they happen to believe, or whatever that they happen to hold. It's just that sorry, I wasn't quite finished. It's just that what Nikki Haley is putting out is a very broad criticism of the very concept of criticism, rather than any sort of refutation of the blatant dishonesty that is occurring in what is very clearly the nerve center of a whole lot of these SJW neo-Marxist types.
That's the insane thing about this video. It's trying to rationalize the notion that criticism is something that you should be critical of. But yeah, back to the universities. Yeah, Heretic and I have in no way even remotely charitable to the academic system that's been set up and defended by the state. I think we have slightly varying views in that regard. I'm critical of the peer review process entirely, but yeah, basically, our criticism, if I don't mean to speak for you if this isn't your view, but I've had quite a few conversations with you about it, and we've made a couple of videos about it. So I'm just paraphrasing for your perspective. Basically, our criticism is that as an institution set up by the state, it's going to have the interest of the state in mind first and foremost, because it's impossible for such a monopoly like that to for one, it doesn't have any sort of incentive to actually act in any sort of mutually interested way with people who go there to learn, and as a result of that, you have sort of no idea whether or not what you're learning is valid. And in many ways, the state planned curriculums, as well as incentives set up by the state, have turned. I'm not just referring to primary school. I'm referring to the colleges as well. Have turned academia into nothing more than a circle jerk of people looking to further their careers, oftentimes at the direct expense of explanatory power and scientific validity, and has led to information being gatekept, and due to academia also being tied heavily to labor licensing laws has also led to academia essentially becoming a sort of has essentially led it to being to becoming a way in which the government sort of plans who can or can't get licenses for certain industries, certain types of firm.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very much my view as well. Northern Texan Squid asks, could you respond to a Gravel Institute video? We did a couple months ago, and the conclusion we came to is that they are a Chinese bootleg of they're a Chinese bootleg of PragerU, and their aesthetics are absolutely terrible. Like their visuals are just painful
Yeah,
to look at.
I hate their aesthetics. I don't know. Maybe we could respond to another one in one of these upcoming streams. Yeah, I'm sorry that I'm stammering. I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around the idea that somebody actually believes the position that the U.S. government can just be defined as not only being defendable, not only being the position in whatever dispute they get in, regardless of being the one that's right, but defining them as being virtuous, as being moral. It's insane to me.
It really is pretty. It really is just. I mean, I can kind of get it because I was in that position at one point in my life where I thought the United States government was, generally speaking, a force for good. I associated my own personal identity with the United States as an organization, or not really an organization, but as a country. I kind of thought of that as like my group, my tribe, and the United States
Yeah,
government
well,
was very much like the nerve center of the tribe, and as such, the United States government could only be morally wrong if the country itself was morally wrong, because you don't really, when you're in that mindset, you don't differentiate society from the government whatsoever,
right. And
which is really the point of, well, nationalism in general.
I understand that mentality because, on top of previously being a statist, I've also sort of greatly been exploring the prospect of what causes people to associate political groups with their identity, and what are the sort of implications of that in their world, in how they process information. So I understand that, but that's not what's being argued here. What's being argued here is the government is inherently just defined as moral, which is which is an insane position that I would have probably objected to even when I was a statist.
Hmm. Anyways, let's go ahead and continue.
And the only person who can set it right side up is you. If that sounds like I'm asking you to shoulder a heavy burden, that's because I am. I wouldn't be asking if I didn't think you were up to it. I fully believe that you are. I've spoken at a lot of colleges. I'm convinced that most of the students still have a strong intuitive love of our country.
A lot of them were indoctrinated in the cult of the omnipotent state, and did have that mindset that I previously described, where they associate their identity with the nation, and as a
Yeah, a lot.
result, that typically manifests in what you would describe as a strong intuitive love of our country, which in
Yeah,
reality is just an irrational affectation.
and just what I was going to say is they probably do operate, most people probably do operate in that mindset where the government is the same thing as the country. I love being able to, I don't know, get a hot dog from a hot dog vendor down the street. That's the same thing as my view of the Constitution or the way Congress should be organized.
But Esso, don't you
Honestly,
know? Joe Biden planned to ban hot dog stands.
Oh god. Is that actually a thing?
No. I'm just making that up, but I think it does
I was about
illustrate
to
like
say.
it does. I think it does quite illustrate very well like just how insane people's ideas are in regards to politics and how overemphasized politics is in terms of its importance in people's day-to-day lives, as though every election is, or every person's life is one election away from just being legislated out of existence.
It's very much the impression that I get talking to some parts of my family recently. So I can definitely see that that's happening, but this isn't by any means the first time, or even the exclusive time that that's been the case. Obviously, there's a pretty clear logical connection between associating your identity with the policy statements made by the state and absolutely losing your fucking mind when the government tries pandering to a different political affiliation.
Patrick Rooney is saying subverting the idea of the nation or the tribe in general is folly. Well, those two are not the same concept. The nation is an attempt to apply the concept of a tribe or just any kind of in-group over over an entire geography that is monopolized over by a state. So
Yeah,
yeah, we're definitely in the interest of subverting nationhood. Absolutely. We're not no one here is critical of tribes per se.
I just picture paleos clipping that out of context.
I mean, there's a whole lot of things that they can use to clip us out of context. I mean,
No,
I'm pretty sure us responding to Asia earlier in the stream is going to be a bit juicier than them trying to take nation out of context, which is why I'm always so freaking disappointed when two things happen. Either people try to include me in a screenshot of like trying to talk about how terrible our community is, how toxic and cult-like we are, and then just me saying like the most mild, basic bitch stuff compared to all of my other just ridiculous hot takes. And then like when people criticize, like you know how I feel about that screenshot from the Christchurch shooting video, and they use that as a criticism of you, even though I made that video. Or rather, more specifically, I edited it.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I mean, I just don't really like that. I just don't really like that meme because it's used as a way for people to ascribe views to people making videos that they never put forward. So and anything that promotes that sort of attitude is sort of by default going to be on my shit list.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, Patrick Rooney, I am a Christian. Anyways, let's go ahead and hit continue.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
why I'm optimistic about America's future. But I know that it's hard to speak out. I know the academic establishment is against you. I didn't say this was going to be easy. It is, however, going to be necessary. So what is it that I'm asking you to do? Be brave. Defend your right to speak out. Defend America to your friends, in class, around campus, wherever you go. Speaking out doesn't mean being rude. And of course, it never means resorting to violence. It means having the facts and saying the truth with clarity and purpose.
There we go again. It's just common sense.
Well, you know,
These are the facts.
being brave
Evidence.
is when you defend America when you defend America to Marxist professors.
God, I wish I had that copy pasta on standby.
Which one?
ex-soldier that goes to college, and the atheist Marxist professor shit talking Christianity.
Oh God, I remember that one. Oh, I've never been able to find that one again. It's so funny though. If all right, those of you who can, those of you in our audience, if go ahead, try to look for this meme. You'll know it when you see it. Of like an of this, it's obviously a parody story of an ex-soldier who goes to college, uh, finds an atheist professor shit talking God, and then the soldier puts him in his place. The professor has a ridiculous overreaction to it, and if I recall correctly, commits suicide. And then
Yeah.
the soldier just comes off as a hero. It's
It's one of the original versions of the "and then everyone clapped" memes. So if you look up that copy pasta format, you should be able to find that story pretty easily.
oh yeah, it's hilarious. Anyways, I'm just gonna go ahead and hit continue.
If you're saying the truth, don't back down, even if your classmates or professor, or in my case, the representatives of 193 governments, try to make you look foolish.
But what if their criticism is valid?
Well, if you're listening to Nikki Haley, you should still defend America, even if their criticisms are completely valid and you're in the wrong.
Like there's a like in I guess in spirit there's a good message here that like a lot of the times you and I particularly have experienced this where um in response to issuing criticism or making claims, instead of receiving, replies attempting to point out what's wrong with them or issues, particularly with certain assumptions or arguments we've made for what our claims entail. We've just received intimidation tactics, and I think that's sort of what's being referred to here. Either intimidation tactics or just attempts to shout others down. But yeah, like I guess if it's contextually appropriate, don't let someone else's intimidation tactics silence you. I mean, I guess that's a good message, but see, this is another issue with the problem of common sense, or the problem of assuming that there's just an objective way to interpret information, to convey information. Is because of that, if you have that entailing what your idea of truth is, or your idea of what argumentation is, it means treating criticism as though it's equivalent to someone using intimidation tactics to try and silence you.
All right. And Patrick Rooney says, "So if I could find you, referring to me, a Bible verse where nationhood is divorced from state or state authority conceptually, would you concede?" That would be heavily contextual, mostly because like I have an extremely interpretation of the Bible, and as such, I would need to see the full context by which that verse is being referenced.
That's the problem. That's a problem that I have with the Bible. I've expressed previously, or really any other religious text. Nationhood or nationality is an inherently political concept. It's it's either it's some sort of political body, whether or not it's tribal, whether or not it's a state, or whether or not whatever you want to call it. It's a body like that, declaring that that a certain land within its borders is defined a certain way. That land, that land claim is nationality, and equating that to the concept of property or freedom of association is it's fallacious. They're entirely two. They're necessarily two different types of property claim. That's something that we went into in the Hoppe essay.
Oh, we got another super chat.
Ooh, nice.
Text to speech isn't going though.
Oh, okay. I what does
All
it
right.
say?
It's from Asia. Hello all, longtime viewer, first time donating to the AGDQ event going on here. Here's $2 for this amazing speed run of PragerU getting intellectually dropkicked. Good luck with the run, and God bless you, tryhards.
Yeah, thanks, even though that's not really much of an accomplishment, because PragerU is basically state propaganda. It's state propaganda, and it's put out in a very low effort, low IQ format where you just kind of state platitudes, but spend very little, if no effort, trying to justify their position, explain why they're right. They just at most cite data, or reference data, even when it's not really contextually appropriate to do so as a standard of proof. And then they most of the time don't even cite their sources.
Mm-hmm. Now, with this in particular, there is one thing I will give them credit for, and that is they actually have a pretty decent idea of identifying a strategy that is more bottom up than anything, which I do think that which I do think is the most value that we can get from this, which is trying to understand that the Libertarian Party strategy of trying to change society from the top down by trying to win elections, by trying to get onto presidential debate stages, ultimately is not really going to be terribly effective. What you actually want to do in terms of creating the change that you want to see is to both exemplify that in your own life by engaging in counter-economic practice, but also, of course, engaging in discussions and debates with those people around you and defending the idea of a free society while challenging them to justify the existence of the state, something that I don't think any statist could ever possibly do, ever.
Political means, hey, political libertarians, political means entail using violence to either set up barriers to entry to privilege some people, or to directly steal and harass and initiate violence against others. Where in any instance of using political means is the outcome where you end up disempowering the state?
I don't think you can. But anyways, let's go ahead and continue. Wait. Hold on a second. Kojoltad in the comments just said, did you guys see that? The Libertarian Party says that attacking the government is an initiation of force. I did not see that.
Oh, I didn't see that. And the Libertarian Party can get fucked now more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely wouldn't recommend people going out, because of how empowered the state currently is, to go like throw rocks at police or whatever. I definitely wouldn't recommend that, but to say it's not ethically justifiable is, yeah, that's clown world stuff right there.
Just speaking from pure ethics, nobody, as far as I'm aware, did anything wrong in storming the Capitol. Maybe some individuals did some things, possibly, but yeah, Kajoltag, go ahead and post that tweet in the Neo Tumblr posting.
In the Discord server for people who are watching that aren't in the Discord server.
All right, he just sent me to it in DMs. The Libertarian
yeah,
Party, the Libertarian Party tweet, LP National said, "This is not patriotism. This is not protesting. This is reprehensible violence and aggression. It needs to stop now. We hope safety for all those who work in the Capitol."
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, since we're living in a society where the state is still incredibly empowered in most situations, it's probably not a good idea, just from a perspective of self-preservation, to go out and try to fuck with police. But considering that the state is by existing um, attempting to put you into an oppressed position, violating your rights, there is nothing unjustifiable about that from an ethical standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, let's go ahead and hit continue.
Defending America means you need to know American history. Given how poorly that history is taught these days, you might have to supplement your education. Start with the primary sources: the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, George Washington's farewell
Right.
speech.
All of those are good ways to learn about the history of the United States government.
Which one of those are historical which one of those are documents about? I know, it's just like I'm just trying to wrap my head around what she said. Like, if you want to learn American history, the first place you go to is documents from history. Which, I mean, I guess if you want to get into discussions about what the Federalist Papers or the Constitution actually says, it would be good. It would be good practice to have an understanding of those, or at least know what's written in those documents beforehand. That kind of goes without saying. But in terms of like actually knowing history, those documents aren't actually going to help you. They're not going to provide any sort of explanatory power for why things like the Great Depression happened. What was the driving force behind getting America involved in World War One? What the hell was the abolitionist movement? Stuff like that.
And there are even more nuanced questions, like the narrative that was being promoted by the U.S. government for intervening in industry in the 19th century compared to now, and why they changed that narrative and tried to flip it on its head, or why that specifically happened. For those who don't know, regulation, quote unquote, used to openly be marketed by political institutions as a way for the state to suppress market cooperation and people from being able to have full control over their own resources, or to have their own bargaining leverage. And this was being argued for under the pretense that since the government was elected, they obviously, the industries that they say are okay are obviously the ones that are better.
All right. Anyways, let's go ahead and continue.
The Gettysburg Address, and Lincoln's second inaugural. And build out from there. Discover America's history for yourself. Make up your own mind. Always remember that you're comparing America to reality, not to utopia.
I just want to point out that every single example that she just provided of things to examine to develop an understanding of the history of the U.S. government, aside from the overwhelming majority of them not even being historical documents, they are all pamphlets or political literature published by the U.S. government, which basically serve which basically in their intention was to serve as pretext for what the government wants you to think of what it does, or what the government wants you, or non-state actors, to think of its role in society. This is sort of what I was going to say earlier. This is a broader problem that historical narratives have. That after you go back a certain point, because there weren't very many outlets through which information could be documented, there were only really a handful of ways in which context could be gathered, because there were only a handful of people or groups collecting information. And what you'll find is that if you go back a certain, particularly to the late 1700s, but it gets worse if you go back even further. But in the late 1700s, it would be kind of dubious to say that any of the widely accepted historical facts were 100% accurate to what actually happened. Things which are colloquially accepted as historical fact should be scrutinized at the very least.
There's a whole lot of misinformation, which anyone who's ever been in a government indoctrination center where it's taught history, you're going to realize after a good amount of time that a lot of what you were taught was complete and total bullshit. Good example, of course, like my personal favorite is, of course, the narrative surrounding the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression, and what caused either and both. I mean, I'm pretty sure you remember I told you that in my history textbook, I remember specifically,
of course,
that it was claimed
voluntarist Herbert Hoover.
It was Herbert Hoover was a voluntarist, and we just needed the central planning of what's his name, Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the New Deal to miraculously solve the Great Depression. How did it solve the Great Depression? Did it even solve it in the first place? I don't know, but the textbook says that it did, so therefore it did.
Yeah, and I'm not even necessarily suggesting that every single person who is trying to add on to these historical narratives that pertain to events that happened 200-300 years ago are being dishonest necessarily. It's just that the only context we have from the time period was from a small handful of institutions with a shared interest. And that's kind of the problem that we see with academia nowadays, except since information can be recorded and it can be by a far broader amount of people and groups, and it can be conveyed with much greater ease. There's less uncertainty with whether or not historical events actually happened at this point, or the nature of those events. I mean, there's still propaganda and misinformation, obviously, but when you go back to the late 1700s, literally the only people that are conveying or documenting information are these institutions. So that's the reason why you get myths like a lot of people, and I think that the U.S. government still promotes the narrative that George Washington was literally unable to tell a lie.
Yeah, that's pretty common thing that you'll see, especially among younger generations, like in elementary school and stuff. That's just some kind of thing that they want to do to try to promote that he does just this great outstanding guy with just this impeccable character, even though you actually look at George Washington as he actually was, and he was a spoiled brat who was a huge narcissist and massively entitled, and even like in his later years was a total womanizer and probably cheated on his wife constantly.
My point was just that sort of, if you do even a little bit of critical thinking about the interests of the US government, and even that the US government would have been sort of the only source of information on that subject, from the time period, that sort of it's nakedly obvious that that's propaganda.
hmm Anyways, I am gonna have to go soon, so let's make this the last
Yeah.
segment.
Sure.
All right, let's go.
Also, remember that you have to judge people in the context of their time, not by the standards of our time. If you do that,
on that note, and relating to the last subject really quickly, it's also a pretty common another example of something a lot of people probably um think is true just because of the outlets of information that are sort of broadly originating this historical narrative. The idea that Napoleon Bonaparte was some short, fat, you could argue he was a narcissist, but some short, fat, self-obsessed imbecile. Well, no, he was actually a pretty arguably brilliant military strategist, and he was also like 6'2".
Actually, wasn't like 5.5'9", like actually.
Oh, he's okay. It was he 5'9"? Sorry,
I'm pretty sure it was 5'9", which would actually make him
point
above
is,
average. It would make him above average for the time period.
I'll look that up really quick.
Yeah, I mean I remember that the whole Napoleon is short narrative was largely British propaganda because the French and the British had different standards for what an inch and what a foot was, and as such, Napoleon's like French measurements, when translated into or when directly brought into English nomenclature, made him seem shorter than he actually was, when in reality he was slightly above average.
Yeah, well, my point was that's an example of a propaganda narrative being passed off as historical fact, and it's propaganda that specifically designed to benefit the British government. But okay, another example that you could point, but you could really look at any significant geopolitical event. Even nowadays, the government still tries to operate as though it's the 19th century, and they're the only ones that are documenting uh, events. But when you go back to 250 years, it gets especially bad, to the point where you can sort of tell just by looking at the way that the narrative is being built that it's propaganda.
All right. Now, should we do one more, or should we just wrap it up here?
You said we were going to do one more. I was just sort of expanding upon some previous thoughts.
All right.
Have every confidence you'll find yourself loving this country as much as I do. America has a great story to tell, but first you have to have the courage to tell it. What the fight for racial equality was to prior generations, the fight for free speech and intellectual freedom is to your generation. You are on the front line. You are the rebel.
Well, I'm the rebel. I don't know about Nikki Haley, though.
Yeah, that's something that is pretty widely despised about PragerU, and I'm aware most people watching the stream are probably familiar with that. But they have this very cringy obsession with trying to tell people that they are countercultural or rebellious. not through their actions or to try to portray their actions that way, but like just unironically arguing like that conservatism is the new counterculture meme.
Yeah, Kotal Chat just said that in the chat, like just now.
Yeah.
They want
And there's just for one thing, there's the irony to it that makes it cringy, which is you can't if you identify as rebellious or countercultural, it kind of takes away from the implied uniqueness of that label.
Mhm. Now, funnily enough,
you're conforming to that. What you're
I
saying?
actually, I actually had a random thought like a couple of weeks ago. I'm pretty sure you remember. I think it was over a year ago by now. I made a video about how torrenting and illegal downloading is a new counterculture.
Yeah.
Although I still stand by that, there is another counterculture that I think is not recognized as a counterculture.
Furries.
Furries, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we were talking about that not too long ago.
Re-
But
we're-
yeah, that would be a great video for sure.
oh my god, that would be if saying that torrenters and streamers on a new counterculture would going to upset a lot of conservatards. What do you think saying a furries on a new counterculture is gonna do?
Upsets all of the pearl clutchers who harass people as a way to try to pretend that they're not clutching their pearls and infiltrate the meme circles.
Yeah, it's. But anyways, don't really think we have much more to add to that. It goes without saying,
Yeah.
we do recommend that the thing that we can't get of value from this is that yes, you should talk to your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, and yes, your college professors, but fuck America. Defend a free society. Have them
Yeah.
defend have them defend America. Have them defend the state. Or have them try to explain to you why it is that they are justified in stealing from you. I've said it before and I'll say it again. My null hypothesis, the way you will get me to become a statist again today, is if you can logically demonstrate to me how the state is justified in stealing from me. If you can do that, I will be a statist today.
I was actually just about to. I was just thinking about a video roughly with that premise, explaining what exactly it is that libertarians are claiming, implications of it, and their sort of laying out the burden of proof that someone arguing for political authority has to meet in order to justify political authority.
All right. So I don't think
Yeah,
we have really much more to add to that. So I'm looking at the chat right now. JC Armitage asks, "Why would furries be considered counterculture?" Well, first off, they not only fall off of the typical mainstream narratives and mainstream culture, but they're also subject to rather surprising amounts of criticism from the mainstream and people associated with the mainstream. It's very common, for example, for furries to be portrayed in negative light whenever they're portrayed at all on mainstream television or even in the news. I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone here remembers the tweet put forward by the National Police Association saying that the costumed cop haters are harassing them.
yeah.
They also produce their own content, not only just artwork, but stories, music, and a whole bunch of stuff. So they do very much create their own genres. And I'm trying to remember what other criteria for a counterculture exists, but I can't quite think of it off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, they pose a massive subversion, not just to mainstream cultural norms, but also also arguably political institutions because of the art communities, and because of their other sort of counter economic activities. And yeah, I'd have to go back and look at your other criteria for countercultural groups, but I've thought about the same concept, and I've come to the same conclusion that uh they are very furryism is very much the new punk rock. If you go back to the 70s or the 80s, there were very similar punk rockers fell into a very similar social category as furries do today.
Hell, just think of like all of the rhetoric that all of the musical countercultures from the last century, the terms that they were used to describe them, and you'll see some very strange parallels, or some very weird parallels between how furries are described, just like absolute sexual degenerates, and you would see the same thing with rock and roll, with jazz, with punk rock. It's yeah. Anyways, I gotta get going, so let's go ahead and wrap this up
All
here.
right.
Do you have any things you wanted to add?
Yeah, that I'm going to probably not be as active on Discord over the next couple days, because I'm going to really sit down and start trying to put more content out because there's an essay that I want to have uploaded by the 6th of February, and it's not one of the ones that I'm working on. I have two that I'm working on at the moment, and one of them's not anywhere near being done, but the other one's I essentially just have to record some more lines, and I can upload it with minimal editing. But yeah, there's a important historical event that I'm trying to catch the deadline of having a video uploaded on that day relating to it. So I want to get that finished.
All right. And I'm still working on that. I'm still working on that video of the whether or not you should take the vaccine. The problem is that I just keep falling into rabbit holes, which is why it's taking as long as it is. It's a pretty long script as it is, but honestly, I don't know what's longer, the actual script or my list of citations. Anyways,
Sounds
yeah.
like it's a video worth waiting for sure.
Oh yeah, like this video is gonna be phenomenal. But yeah, hopefully it should be done in the next couple days, as I'm pretty sure I'm coming up to the end. But yeah. Anyways, everyone, thanks for